Hi theory students. Today we're going to be covering the last parts of the chapter on diatonic sequences. There are a few topics that we still haven't covered yet. One of them is a descending thirds sequence. We know that very well from the Pachelbel canon, as I'll show you. The other is to have parallel 6/3 chords, and that's somewhere between a kind of sequence and a kind of chord progression. And lastly, having repeating patterns of 7/6 or 5/6 above a static bass that moves in sequence. First, the descending third sequence. It doesn't have to run the entire octave the way the descending fifth sequence often does, but instead we often get 1, 6, 4, and 2. We don't often hear those directly as a sequence. For example, from the Mozart horn rondo that they have in the book, if we had those as chords, we would hear everything moving in parallel fifths. Instead, what we often have is a chord in between, so that if we had a 1, a 6, and a 4, we put a chord here, and a chord there, and a chord there, so that we would have a pair of chords that avoid the parallels. In this case, we put a 5, a 3, and a 1 over there. So there's the descending fourth here, there, and there to form each of the segments. Let's see what this looks like. So here we have the familiar Pachelbel. And the linear intervallic pattern is 10-5, 10-5, 10-5. If we were to put chords in for this, in this particular case, for the fourth measure, we hear a 2/6, which even though it's in first inversion, continues the descending thirds. We break the pattern off here because we're not going to go to a 6 chord, but rather go to a 5 chord for the half cadence. One way this is sometimes altered would be to take the offbeat chords here. I would change the upper voice, in particular the alto voice, which is going down the scale. I wouldn't have that in parallel octaves. I might take that out altogether and have a 5/6, a 3/6, and a 1/6. So now if I play it without the alto voice, then that makes for a smooth bass line, and that works very well also. You'll hear either version of those in the descending third sequence. What's important to remember is that these offbeat chords are inserted so that when the segment goes down a third, we can avoid parallel fifths, parallel octaves. This is what I was talking about, and this is what the chord progression looks like. Next, for parallel 6/3 chords, there are a string of 6/3 chords that move either up or down, so the linear intervallic pattern would be 6, 6, 6, 6, as long as we have those parallel 6/3 chords. And because they're in first inversion, we take the fifth out of the bass, and we avoid parallels that way. We tend to have short segments for these. In other words, the 6/3 chord will occupy only one beat, or maybe as long as one measure, but we tend not to have very long segments because we don't match these with a pair of chords. They're just single 6/3 chords moving from one to the other. It's a little less of a chord progression. We don't really talk about long strings of descending seconds or ascending seconds as good root motion. It's more of a linear way to get from one place to another, and we pay the most attention to the first and the last chords in the sequence. Let me show you. So here in this progression, if we start with a 1 chord, and then we go down with a series of 6/3 chords till I get to the 2/6. 5/6, 4/6, 3/6. Once I'm on the 2/6, now I can go to a 5 and a 1. So even though we have these 4 first inversion chords in a row, the effect of it is that I've moved from this 1 chord just through descending motion to the 2/6. I stop the motion there, and then I get on with my phrase. Go to 5, go to 1. So the contextual analysis is tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic. I can sometimes embellish with things like escape tones. Sorry. Or other kinds of embellishments, but the segments still tend to be short. Finally, we have repeating 7/6 or 5/6 linear intervallic patterns, which are two ways to create sequences that mask the parallel motion. The 7/6, 7/6, 7/6 works well as a series of suspensions, and it's usually used in descending sequences. Let's go back to the progression we just looked at with the parallel 6/3 chords. Imagine here now, every place where I've got a 6/3 chord, suppose I took those away and instead tied those over, tied those over, and tied those over. So now if I look at the interval from the bass on up, we get those 7/6 suspensions. And that would be a good way to embellish a descending set of 6/3 chords. We could also use that in an ascending pattern where we have 5/6 for each segment. So the linear intervallic pattern is 5/6, 5/6, 5/6. And this is a good way to hide the parallel fifths we'd ordinarily get if we went directly from a 1 chord to a 2 chord to a 3 chord in a sequence. It's often used in ascending sequences, and let me show you. Here in this sequence in F major, I went to a half cadence at the end, but the essential motion here is 1 to 2 to 3, sort of. We could say that that's hidden by the 6 over there, so that we're not hearing the direct fifths, the 6 over there. When we get to the third measure, by the time the E goes to the F, we might hear that as a 1-6, going to the 2-6, to the 5, so that the effect of it would be expansion of the tonic, predominant, and dominant. Remember that for all of our sequences, you'd have to see them in the context of a phrase. Look at the repeating pattern, see where you begin the sequence, see where you end the sequence, and figure out what you need to do in the rest of the phrase in order to get to the cadence. That ends our chapter on sequences.